If you're like me, when it's bedtime, you get your AC cold, you get under the warm blanket, and you get cozy. But something's not quite right yet. Why? You're warm, you're comfortable. Then it hits you. Your one foot needs to stick out from under the covers. For me, it's my left foot. I don't know about you. Now, that foot's cold. It's too cold, actually. But somehow now you're comfortable. Now, why? Why do we do this? And I really do hope I'm not alone in doing this, or this video will be largely meaningless. But seriously, why do we do this? Why don't we just change the temperature to be something that we like all over and then just lie there? Why do we like being under a blanket in the cold with our foot sticking out? Now, the author Herman Melville knows why we do this, and you'll find out in this episode of Bookmarked, Moby Dick and the Thermostat of Life. I'm a fan of this title. So you're maybe familiar with Moby Dick, great American novel, Call Me Ishmael, Crazy Captain Ahab, Peg Leg, White Whale. I read the hyper-abridged version a lot growing up, and I read the full version finally this year. There's a lot to unpack and a whole lot of pages, but we're just going to talk about one thing today. The temperature thing, that is, specifically. So in the beginning of the book, the protagonist, Ishmael, is getting ready to go to sea in a whaling boat. So they're going to go hunt whales, which this was a couple hundred years ago. We did that more then. So he goes to an inn and it's full, but the innkeeper goes, hey, I can probably find you a room if you're chill with having a roommate. And so he gets a roommate, and long story short, it turns out his roommate is a Pacific Islander named Queequeg, who comes from a cannibalistic society. They're very different. It's kind of like a buddy cop film, right? And there's a lot of funny things that happen from the clashes of their cultures. I'm not going to go into their friendship here, although it's hilarious, wonderful, and inspiring, but just know that they get along well despite a rocky start. Anyway, the part we're looking at comes from a portion where Ishmael and Queequeg are getting into bed. So it's a cold Nantucket night. Nantucket is an island off Massachusetts in the northern United States, if you're not familiar. So it's cold. It's quite cold. And Ishmael, who is also, again, the narrator, has this brilliant observation on their comfort and the temperature. And he says, and this is a bit of a longer quote, but stick with me, "We felt very nice and snug, the more so since it was so chilly out of doors. Indeed, out of bedclothes too, seeing that there was no fire in the room." So he's saying, right, it's cold outside, and also we don't have a fire, so it's cold in here too. So their equivalent of the AC is blasting. He continues, "The more so, I say, because truly, to enjoy bodily warmth, some small part of you must be cold, for there is no quality in this world that is not what it is merely by contrast. Nothing exists in itself. If you flatter yourself that you are all over comfortable and have been so a long time, then you cannot be said to be comfortable anymore. But if, like Queequeg and me in the bed, the tip of your nose or the crown of your head be slightly chilled, why then indeed, in the general consciousness, you feel most delightfully and unmistakably warm." So this explains my cold feet and warm body and why I don't just set my temperature to 75 and call it quits. It explains why it feels good to wear a coat in the winter, but let your nose kind of stick out and get red. And then also why it feels good to go inside after that and warm up. It explains why at Christmas it feels nice to have your feet next to the fire just a little too hot and your head farther away, just a little too cold. But is this just limited to temperature? Maybe, just maybe. This quote can help us explain why vacation feels so nice after a busy season, and then why at the end of the vacation it feels so nice to get back to work. Why relaxing your muscles after a stretch and a run feels better than just sitting on the couch. And I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to this, but the quote, for me, begs at even bigger questions. Like, would we know and understand happiness as fully without sadness? Would we cherish life in the same way if it wasn't temporary? I love playing music, and there's a quote I've heard, and I've heard it attributed to a number of musicians, so I don't know who said it for sure, but it goes something like, music is created in the second note. As soon as you hit one note, that's just a note. That's all it is. When you hit another note, no matter what, the second note defines the first note. Until that second note appears, you have no idea how to feel about the first note. The change and the distance between the notes tells you how to feel. The second note tells you how to understand the first note. Maybe your cold foot needed to be sacrificed so your body could know it was warm. Maybe there's a time for hyper busy activity so that you can know and appreciate rest, and vice versa. The author of Ecclesiastes says, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." Now, what does this mean for us living life? I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. But I know one thing, I'm cranking my thermostat way down tonight. See you next time.